Hello and thank you for coming. My name is Dave KilCullen. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I and guys like me have been doing since 9/11 and a little bit more about what's going to happen on the planet in the next, let's say, 30 to 40 years and how that's going to affect you. At a deeper level, what I want to focus on is conflict, resilience, and how we unlock creativity to deal with that. So let me start off with a photograph that I took a few years ago. If I can get this thing to work, there we go. I took this photograph at about 3:45 p.m. on September the 9th, 2011. Look in the background, you can see a bunch of snow-covered mountains. That's the Pakistani border. I'm in a valley about 15 miles from Pakistan with a patrol from a provincial reconstruction team in the middle of a rural, remote, landlocked, mountainous valley amongst a whole bunch of tribal, very traditional, and somewhat unfriendly locals. About 15 minutes after this photograph was taken, we got ambushed moving down the valley. Every single time that I've been ambushed in Afghanistan, it's been a late afternoon scenario coming down the hill out of a valley. Why? Because when you go up there in the morning, there's only one way to come out, and they know you're coming out late in the afternoon. This is the environment that guys like me in the military, in diplomatic services, in aid agencies have become very used to dealing with over the last decade. It's not the environment that we're going to see in the future. In the future, we're looking at not a landlocked, remote, rural, tribal environment. We're looking much more at an urban, networked, coastal environment. And that's not only going to affect people in the military, it's much more going to affect people that are in business, people that are involved in humanitarian activity, and the communities, individuals, governments, people that run small businesses, people that take part in educational or cultural activity, who occupy the big cities that are going to be really the face of the future. So let me talk about some big trends in the environment that are driving this future that I'm talking about. And I want to focus on four in particular: population, urbanization, littoralization, which is just a fancy geographer's word for the tendency for things to cluster on coastlines, and then finally connectivity. At the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1750, the population of the planet was 750 million people. By the year 1900, 150 years later, that population had doubled to 1.5 billion. By 1960, it was 3 billion. By 2000, it was 6 billion. And in the decades or more since the end of the 20th century, we've added another 1.1 billion people to the planet. So the population is not only growing, the rate of growth is accelerating. Now, the guys up in New York at the UN Bureau of Economic and Social Affairs who track this kind of stuff predict that the population of the planet isn't going to keep on growing forever. We're going to top out at somewhere around 9.3 billion people around the middle of this century, around 2050. Now, the interesting thing about that population growth is where those people are going to go, because it's not going to be evenly spread. And that brings us to the second big factor that we're dealing with, the sort of mega trend of urbanization. If we go back to the beginning of the 19th century, roughly 3% of people lived in a city of 1 million or more. By 1900, it was 25%. By April of 2008, it was 50%. Same dudes up in New York that do the data predict it's going to be 75% by the middle of the century. As one example, India today, second most populous country on the planet, is 2/3 rural, 1/3 urban. By about 2040, that's going to flip. It's going to be 2/3 urban, 1/3 rural. People predict that the entire west coast of India is going to be one giant urban environment. We're not talking about downtown DC. We're talking about informal slum settlements with very few amenities, very little government presence, not a lot of economic and infrastructural development. That's becoming very much the future of urban growth and the future of population growth on the planet. Third big factor, littoralization, coastal tendency, the tendency for things to cluster on coastlines. Today, 80% of people on the planet live within 50 miles of a coastline. And as, of course, more and more people move into cities, they're clustering more and more in these coastal environments. 25 of the largest cities on the planet were surveyed in 2000, and the guys who did the survey figured out that 21 out of 25 of those cities are directly on a coastline or on a major river delta. So the future is going to be urban, it's going to be pretty crowded, and it's going to be coastal. The fourth factor, connectivity, is really a new phenomenon. Those other three, I've gone back to 1800 or 1750 to describe them, but the growth of connectivity is really a new thing. Today, there are roughly 6 billion cell phones on the planet. So roughly 6 out of 7 people have a cell phone. That's about 2 billion more people than have access to a toilet or clean running water. And the level of connectivity that we see, even in the remotest places, has really changed dramatically, even in the last decade. Take a look at this photograph. This is the favela of La Rocinha, which is a informal slum settlement on the southern side of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Take a look at what's on the rooftops. You see a lot of water reservoirs. This is a place that doesn't have running water. You see a lot of electricity cables, but what you also see is satellite dishes. And if you fly over any coastal city in the developing world, Lagos in Nigeria, Dhaka in Bangladesh, Mogadishu in Somalia, you see the same thing. Satellite dishes. People are connected in a very continuous and detailed way, not only with other people in their own cities. La Rocinha has about 100 bloggers. It's got a television station, a number of different community internet sites and radio stations. But you also see enormous economic activity emerging out of this new pattern of connectivity. Now, I'm a soldier. Why do I care about that stuff? Well, obviously it has some pretty significant impacts on conflict and on the way that conflict happens. Not only does rapid urban growth often lead to unrest, to urban dislocation, to people getting marginalized from economies, and to therefore a fair bit of violence, but it also changes the way that governments and military forces around the planet fight each other. Take a look at this photograph. Most people have probably seen this. October the 20th, 2011. This is about the last 15 seconds of Muammar Gaddafi's life in the area of Ceuta on the coastal strip of Libya. This video was taken by one of the fighters who killed Gaddafi. It was on Al Jazeera less than 40 minutes later, after being passed from cell phone video to cell phone video. It was around the entire internet 90 minutes later, and Gaddafi's fighters surrendered within a couple of days. That's extraordinarily rare in this kind of conflict. People saw the boss die in real time or near real time on television, and they stopped fighting. There was actually a lot more than this that was new about the way that the Libyan war unfolded, and we see many of the same patterns today in Syria. One thing we saw during Libya was the use of smartphones and Google Earth and the use of iPhone compass apps and Android phones to guide rockets and artillery and to provide essentially bomb damage assessment, so passing information to ships and planes off the coast as to what damage is being done. We see this enormous set of changes in the way that conflict is conducted. But that's not all we see. Mike Davis, famous urban theorist, points out that the world is becoming a planet of slums. But it's not all bad, because one of the things we find when we operate in places like this is that communities have within themselves the creativity that's needed to unlock a lot of the resilience to adapt to these environments. If you think about 3 billion more people on the planet in urban environments in the third world by 2050, that seems pretty daunting. But if you think about 2 billion more people in the global middle class and the ability to unlock that human capital and bring that into the world's economy and deal with urban challenges, it looks quite different. This is a photograph from one of my teams operating in West Africa last year. These are women from a community in a slum settlement in one of the big cities on the West African coast, mapping the challenges and threats in their suburb and figuring out what to do and how to address them. With the new tools that we're going to see even in the next 10 to 20 years, all kinds of co-design possibilities become open to us. Outsiders bringing technical and functional knowledge, insiders bringing insight and leadership. I believe there is no military solution to what we've just been talking about. I believe the military has a key role in enabling that, but the real people that have to drive it is you. Creativity, co-design, outsiders and insiders coming together in this very complex, urban, crowded coastal environment is the key to unlocking the creativity that we need to meet this challenge. Thank you, Ted.